Edius has had a facelift. Officially, they redesigned it to fit to 4K monitors. I don't have any. But I like the interface, so the previous versions of Edius, they looked so 90s, and this one is just neat. Edius has peculiar windows design, so any of the windows, they can be detached and rearranged like that, and they just snap back. And if you hit close here, that's not what you normally expect. So this was the bin window where your project media is stored. So if you accidentally close that, you go to view and hit bin, or just press B. And to quit Edius, you have to click this exit button. To import footage, you just right click here and choose add file. I select my files here, click open, and now I can drag them onto timeline. Or I can drag and drop them right from Windows Explorer. Edius has unique track structure. So by default, that main track is VA, which is video and audio combined. So I can unfold my audio. You can add volume and panorama to it. And here, if you click mix, you can change the compositing level of the clip. That's opacity. But if you prefer the old school NLE workflow like the one Premiere has, so you can drag your clip to a V track, which is video only. Oops, undo. That's because I have this button in insert mode. So what it actually does, if I drag it here, if I zoom out, it has inserted the new clip and slid the rest of the timeline to the right. If I don't want that behavior, Ctrl Z, I can switch to override mode and drag it like that. Now I have video and audio separately, like in Premiere. So if I add a new track, right click here, choose add, and you can choose the type of a track to add. I want V track above. First I move the selectors to the appropriate tracks that I want my files to be imported to, like that, and if I drag this one, there it goes. So if I delete that audio and video track and just add a V track, I can drag them around, I can switch and swap tracks, unlike Premiere. And if I drag this one here, select that, select this, and re-add my first clip. So essentially now I'm having the same timeline style as with Adobe Premiere. If you like it, you can work this way. If you don't, just delete that and add audio and video combined tracks. But anyway, Edius gives you freedom to choose your preferred workflow. As for these buttons here, these are sync locks. So for instance, if you drag a file here, see what it does. It has slid all of the clips that were here to the right to give room for this one. But if I click these two buttons for video tracks and corresponding buttons for audio tracks, and if I insert one here, look what happens. It has slid just one clip to the right, and these tracks, they were unaffected. And if I push that button and turn the override mode on, so if I drag it here, it just kills the previous file and inserts that in place of the previous one. And if I drag this one here, it has just replaced the original file. And if I insert something which is shorter, see what happens. It just replaced a part of that clip and made a cut here. Well, if you're a novice, these things may look very confusing, and as you're learning, these buttons might appear your enemies, but once you've tamed them, they become powerful tools at your disposal. But if you come from Premiere, that track patching and sync locks button, they're very similar. It's just more advanced in Edius because you can rearrange tracks by dragging them like that, and you can have audio and video combined tracks in Edius, so it's a bit more flexible. So if I press Ctrl A to select all and press C to cut, it has only cut just one clip, but if I select these tracks beforehand, press Ctrl A, press C, I've cut all of them. Let me make a few more cuts like that. Another important thing to remember is grouping. So if I select all of these clips, right click, go to link group and set group or press G, they all appear as one block, so I can drag them around all together. And if I switch to insert mode and if I drag it here, see, I can swap the whole bunch, like in Final Cut. So Final Cut's magnetic timeline is not as unique as they advertise that. By grouping clips together and having the right mode selected, you can do much of the stuff that you can do in Final Cut. Undo that. And if I have ripple mode disabled and have override mode turned on, so I can trim this clip like that and have a gap here, if I undo that. And if I have insert mode on, I can trim it like that because the ripple mode is all about having no gaps. So once again, it might look a bit complicated for a novice, but all of these buttons, all of these modes are there for a reason and they do various useful things. So you have to learn that first and understand how each one of them affects your editing. Now I have imported all of my files to the timeline and it's time to sync them. And here comes problem. Edius itself doesn't have any built-in audio sync tools. Previous versions of Edius were supported by Pluralize, but since version 7 that support had been dropped. There are workarounds for that. You can export your project to AAF, but that doesn't work for me. So if I go here to details, select use original clips for it not to copy it, and click OK, save, and that's what I have. It cannot export my project because I have mixed frame rates on my timeline. Some of my clips are 50p and some of them are 25p. That's the problem, it just cannot. So if you're happy not to have mixed frame rates in your project, you can export that to Pluralize, have that sync there, have a round trip, and at this point, Edius turns into tedious for me. I have to do that all manually. But before I plunge into that grind, I just forgot about this little guy here. So that part is the title track. The weirdness of that is that although it is below the rest of the tracks, the clips here, they will appear in front of the others. So if you right click here, choose new clip, quick titler, type in some text, go to save. So that little stripe is it. You just drag it to extend. And that's it. Here you have your text on top of your footage, and you can actually drop here any of your clips. And the only difference between a normal track and a title track is that it has kind of fade in and fade out points here. But we don't need that for this project, and I'll just delete that. Okay, I have re-imported all of my clips using the VA work style because I just like it. Just look how tidy the timeline looks with just 6 tracks on it instead of 12. So to zoom in and out, we use this slider here, or we can just fit the entire timeline to zoom or press Ctrl 0, or we can use Ctrl mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Now I unfold the audio waveforms. So Edius works just like Premiere in this respect. It does not have visual feedback, so I have to do it Premiere way. To nudge clips around, you use Control and angle bracket keys. Like that. And I'll repeat that for the rest of the tracks. Alright, now I have my timeline in sync. And I also got rid of audio tracks completely, and I placed my music track onto this VA track number 1 because it has some separate status in Edius. It has its own scroll bar here. It's something like primary storyline in Final Cut or whatever they call that, but it helps in my situation. So if I scroll these tracks, that one always stays the same, which is exactly what I like for this project. Now it's time to do the multicam. It's not sequence based like in Premiere or in Final Cut, it just can interpret the tracks in my project like multicamera angles. To enable that, I go to Mode and choose Multicam Mode. Or I can switch back and forth with F8 key. It looks a bit weird now because we have to set it up. First, we again go to mode and set the number of cameras. So by default, it uses 2 plus master, but I'll switch that to 9. And now I have this, a little bit weird again. But if we look here, in that F8 multi-camera mode, it thinks that my audio track is camera 1. I just unmap that. Set this camera to camera 1. Camera 2, and so forth. Now that I have them neat and tidy, let's hit play. The problem is that Edius doesn't have any low-res preview mode. That's their ideology. They believe that user must always have high-res preview. Well, that's good for different type of editing, but that definitely doesn't work for multicam. So a workaround for that is to go to mode. And here you choose view multicam, skip frames, and you can force Edius to skip a number of frames, eventually reducing your output frame rate. So I choose 2 frames. Now we don't have much of the dropped audio, but the playback is not smooth this way.
On the same that bar crosses, some of those that work forces.
So we have no choice, and the only option we are left with is to reduce the number of tracks. Let's turn off that one.
Crosses, some of those that work forces. Draw the same that bar
No go. Another one. Now I have my audio fine, and let's see whether I can increase my frame rate output. It's almost there, but even with 4 tracks, it's not perfect. I can try to reduce the number of cameras to 4. Well, I actually figured out what was the problem. I had my audio track out of sync with the rest of the cameras all the time, and that turned out to be because I was using an MP3 file, and since I replaced it with a WAV file, PCM uncompressed, I have much better performance now. I almost can play 6 tracks, so if I turn off just one, let's see. So I have few audio drops now and then, but overall that's usable. So I took time trying to figure out what might be wrong, and I have created another project using MOV files. As you remember, that helped with Premiere. Perhaps this will help Edius to play them back.
Now you do what they told you. Now you do what they told you. Now you do what they told you.
No. I cannot even play 4 tracks in real time. 3.
Now you do what they told you. 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 Now you do what they told you.
MOV is a no-go, unfortunately. Well, the only option we are left with is proxy. But for the consistency of this comparison, I would like to show you first how to cut multicamera in Edius. At least with MTS we can still play 4 tracks at once. Cutting multicamera in Edius is pretty much straightforward. You hit play and you start clicking on the angles, just like in any other NLE.
On the same that burn crosses.
That's it. As Edius's multicam is not sequence-based, you see what it does actually. It resembles the way Vegas treats multicam. So it makes a cut here, enables the clip on the track that you have selected, and disables the rest of them, and that's it. So you can move these markers around, and that will adjust your cut point. You can add a new cut by double-clicking here. And to switch between cameras, you just click on it. And that's it. I find this workflow kinda limited because there is no way you can do something like 25 cameras with it. After all, Edius is just limited to 16. That's the maximum number you can get in it. And to fix my glitchy lagging camera, I have to do the same trick I did in Vegas, because I cannot just nudge it like that, 4 frames, because it will leave a gap here, it will overlap there. So I'll just zoom out, I'll select all of these tracks, zoom in back so you can see that, and I need to use the slip tool. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4 frames here. I place my cursor here, hold Ctrl Alt and bring it over here. It's now in the trimming mode. I just have to click somewhere to get out of it, and now that's all right now. Good. Now we can add effects. To add effects, you go to Effect, and unfortunately there is no search box, so you cannot just type in the name of the effect and have it found. So you have to go old-fashioned way, just find it manually. Curves, go here, double click, and now we can edit it. Maybe like that. But actually there's no need for that because the workflow in Edius is quite different. So when you're finished cutting, first I need to switch back to multicamera mode. And I go to mode and choose compress to single track. This is similar to flatten multicam in Premiere. I choose new video track, click OK. Now I can disable all of my original tracks. F8 to switch to normal mode. And as you can see, my curves are still here. They haven't gone anywhere. Edius doesn't have anything similar to banks that Final Cut has, so you can't switch between the sets of camera angles. But let me undo all of that for now, because we'll try to test Edius performance with its proxy mode. In fact, Edius has a built-in proxy workflow, which is quite capable. To create a proxy, you go to Bin, select a file, right-click on it, and choose Create Proxy. Alternatively, you can go to File menu, Create Proxy, and do that for all files, or for all files in the bin, or for all clips on the timeline. In this case, I just want to proxy one file. Let's do that. So this little icon down here indicates that the proxy creation is in progress. It takes a while. To see the background job currently in progress, you go to View, Background Job, and there it is. Edius creates a small proxy file in the same folder that your media is located. So I have here my front camera, which takes 7 GB, and front.mts.proxy takes just 576 megabytes. It's a really low resolution, highly compressed file. It's 12 times less than the original, which is, by the way, good for multi-camera playback. To switch between the originals and proxies, you go to Mode and choose Proxy Mode. And immediately you can see that all of the clips got this checkerboard pattern. So that indicates that this clip is in proxy mode. And we also can see stripes on this particular clip. That means that the proxy has not been calculated for it. Now that I have that fixed, there's one little trick. You go to Settings, User Settings, User Interface button, and here you can select the place you would like to add a new button to. I want to add it to the timeline bar. It's this one. So I find Proxy here, add it to it, click Apply, Okay. And now I have a proxy switch right on my timeline bar. Now I can turn my sixth camera back on. Now we have a real-time playback of 6 angles, but I think that's not the limit for 12 times compressed files. Let's see if we can do more. I'll have to do some cutting now. So now I have 12 of them. Well, after a few experiments, I found out that Edius can handle 8 tracks simultaneously in proxy mode. So that's not much. I was hoping for more, but that's what we have, and that's still better than the originals. Next, I would like to test it with my custom MP4 proxies, but here we've got another problem. Edius does not allow user to choose the proxy format, and its relinking capabilities are quite limited. So if I want to relink that file, there's a menu here, restore offline clip, but that's grayed out. So unfortunately, there's no direct way just to tell Edius, go and replace that file. There's a trick for that. If I go to my project folder and I just rename it. If I go back to Edius, they're gone. They're missing. And it's now that I can restore offline clips with the built-in dialog. Here in this project, I have some MOV files missing. And if I go here to restore offline clips, and if I want to replace this one with an MTS file from here, that's fine. But if I'll try to replace this one with overhead.mts, that's the problem. It does not allow me. So I find that feature quite limited in Edius. It doesn't work with any sort of files. That's the problem. But fortunately, it allows me to relink my MTS files to MP4s without any problems. I was lucky enough to replace all of my MTS files with my custom-made MP4 proxies. Now let us test performance.
You do what they told you.
Well, surprisingly, but my custom-made 5 megabits per second MP4 proxies outperformed the native proxies of Edius. So I was able to play 10 tracks with MP4 files. But that's just for the pure science, because the relinking capabilities are quite poor, to be honest, in Edius, and if you have a large concert like that, if you have hundreds of files, I don't think that you want to relink them all manually. Although multi-camera playback is mediocre in Edius, it's still a capable video editor overall. Even though the multi-camera mode is not sequence-based like in Premiere or in Final Cut, it still supports sequences. I'll just create a new one. So if I drop a file here, make some cuts, just let me disable the proxy mode. So you can do all the normal things with sequences, like you can select these 3 clips. It's not as easy as just right-click in here and nesting that as in Premiere. It's a bit cumbersome, but there is a way. So you have to either select in point and out point, and then go to Edit and click on Set between in and out a sequence. This will create a new sequence and add it on top of that. So if I open this sequence, you know, it doesn't have audio in it. That's a problem. So I close this and I delete it. This one too. So I'll clear these in and out points. And another way to create a new sequence is to select these 3 clips, go to Edit, Add Sequence to Bin, Selected Clip. Now we have a new sequence in the bin. Then I'll add a new track on top of that. I deselect these 3 and just drag this sequence onto the timeline. That's it. Another feature that is worth mentioning is that Edius supports After Effects plugins. So if you go to Settings, System Settings, Effects, here in the After Effects plugin bridge you can add your After Effects folder, and some of the After Effects plugins will load as Edius launches. But some of them might crash your system. That happened to me. But fortunately there's an exclusion list here, so you can add the faulty plugins to blacklist. However, if Edius crashes upon startup, you have no access to that. So you have to rename your After Effects plugin folder, restart Edius, and it's only then that you have access to that blacklist. One more thing about Edius is that the learning curve is kind of steep, and the online community is quite small. So if I have a question about Vegas Premiere or Final Cut, I can Google that and there's 90% probability that there is already an answer to my question. That's not so with Edius. So you'll have to consult manual or ask questions to other users. Well, that's it for Edius, and we have one more NLE to review in this series.